co-chair Dr. Zahira Abbas as well. So moving forward, as the clock is ticking fast towards the end of the symposium, it is the time for one of the most interesting talks of the day. We are graced by the presence of our third and last esteemed keynote speaker, Dr. Adil Najam. Dr. Adil is of the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. He is also a professor of international relations and earth and environment. Earlier, Professor Adil Najam served as Vice Chancellor of the Lahore University of Management Sciences, LUMS, and as the Director of Boston University of Pardee Center for the Study of Longer Range Future. In addition to the Boston University, he has taught at MIT and at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. His research focuses on issues of global public policy, especially those related to global climate change, South Asia, Muslim countries, environment and development, and human development. Dr. Najam will be delivering the keynote on understanding the world after coronavirus. Now it's the time to welcome Dr. Adil Najam. Over to you, sir.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum ji, thank you very much. So very good to talk to you all, and so very good to be invited. बहुत shukriya. It is always a pleasure to be with colleagues from BUTIMS. It is an institute that I have very great respect for and very fond of, and I was there recently about a year ago, and I wish I was there again. Unfortunately, because of COVID, that is not possible. And congratulations to all the organizers for a wonderful conference and a very timely one. So I wanted to do two things, but if I can just get one request from the organizers. Am I right that I can share the screen, but the audio is not possible? Is that right? Can someone confirm so that I don't then go that route on the share screen?
Yes, sir, you can.
नहीं, audio possible होगा?
बिल्कुल possible है.
अच्छा. Okay, wonderful. I want to, as I said, I wanted to thank everyone, and you've had a wonderful day of lots of very, very interesting and useful and important conversations. What I want to do, and maybe this is the right thing to do towards the end of the day, is to take the conversation up to 30,000 feet. We have talked a lot, and I've learned a lot about sort of very specific, very real, immediate Pakistan issues, and I am looking forward to a lot of the research that has been mentioned, because it is looking very specifically on the challenges for us here in Pakistan. In some ways, what I want to do is to now sort of take it at a broader level and look at the global side कि दुनिया में क्या हो रहा है, और obviously जो पाकिस्तान में हो रहा है वो दुनिया में जो हो रहा है उससे related है, उससे connected है, दोनों चीजें जो हैं वो अलग-अलग नहीं होती. And what I have been doing since March में when this COVID thing started, so I, as you mentioned, am the dean of something called the Pardee School of Global Studies, which is at Boston University. It's a school of international affairs. And we have one of our institutes is called, one of the institutes here is called the Pardee Center for the Study of the Future. We look at future trends, you know, what is coming, what is happening. So what we thought was that this was a good time to think about what will happen after Corona. Right, so this is आप अगर अंदाजा करें कि ये मार्च की बात है. In March we were in honesty thinking कि okay, this will last a few weeks and months, but this is going to be big. China had already gone through it. Italy and Europe were going through it. US it was just beginning. Or so we thought, okay, this is a good time. Let's go out and talk to really sort of experts and leaders in the world to ask them कि what they think the world after Corona might look like. And that's what I want to present. So between March, beginning of March and end of August, I ended up talking to nearly just over 100 global experts. We had Nobel winners, we had the Prime Minister of Italy, we had people like Noam Chomsky, we had leading scholars, we had leading think tank, people like Thomas Piketty, the economist, people like Joe Stiglitz, the economist, and well, actually not Joe Stiglitz, Angus Deaton, the Nobel winner. And we talked them and we asked them only one question. We said, Kiyar, what do you think the world after Corona, not now, what do you think the world after Corona might look like? Right? And we release just about every second day a 5-minute, very short 5-minute video with each expert with their answer to this question. So August tak humne ye kiya. And since August, we've been sort of collecting all of that and saying, okay, what have we found from it? And what I want to do in my few minutes is to maybe share with you some of those lessons, some of those what we learned, and share with you what these experts think, what we think in listening to the experts now that we are sitting here in the end of October, nearly in the beginning of November. Maybe I will start, and we'll also test the screen share with a little clip, 2 minutes, of some of the things that we heard on the economic front. And then what I want to do is to give you my 10 lessons. But I just want to first see whether this video will also work, so that we can then look into what the possibilities are. So if you give me just 1 minute, let me try to put share screen and see whether we can make this work. I hope people can see a YouTube screen here. Is that right? Can someone say yes?
Yes, sir, we can.
Okay, and if the sound doesn't come, please let me know.
Sure, sir.
Of returning to status quo ante. Society will be transformed, I think, permanently. And this notion of returning to status quo ante is, I think, not possible.
I think that the level of shakeup in our global economy is going to be the most serious challenge civilization has faced in 300 or 400 years.
If you look at the responses to this crisis, it is often going to lead to an incredible increase in the levels of debt that households, governments, and corporations are going to have.
When you're hit with something like Corona, which is simultaneously a demand and supply shock, and it continues in waves, this type of growth model that's based on consumption is a disaster.
How does the EU solve the problem of the pandemic economic crisis and also pull itself out of the Eurozone crisis?
The big question that I wish we had an answer for, and so far I don't think we have an answer for, is where will the good jobs come from?
Developing countries need to find as much fiscal space as they can possible. They are fighting the virus. Their debt is ballooning. They're also losing remittances, which many countries rely on.
I would not expect many developing countries to get to 2019 levels of income by 2025.
One positive thing that has come out of this crisis might be to make developing countries more self-confident and make them seek their own ways.
If you said 40 years ago that inequality would have gotten a lot worse, people would have said, well, there'll be a revolution. Maybe it'll get worse still and there won't be a revolution. Maybe this time will be too much.
A society that wants to deal with inequality, poverty, and injustice can, but it does mean you have to reduce the extreme, obscene levels of wealth in comparison to the extreme levels of poverty.
We need to develop an economic system, an international economic order, and a regulation of globalization that brings us to a more equitable and also sustainable development model for the future.
Thank you. If I can have someone just confirm for me that you could see the videos, so that
The video and audio both were good.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So that was just a flavor. As I said, we have 100 of these videos. You saw the people we were talking to. These are really sort of world's thought leaders in many areas. And here we just put a little clip of what some of the ones who were economists or who were talking about the global economy were talking about. And we made sort of similar capsules on politics and on technology and life, and I might show one more. But it gives you a flavor कि हमने किया क्या. So this was interesting, and this is interesting also because this is happening as the pandemic is moving. So our own, हमारी अपनी भी तो जो knowledge है ना pandemic के बारे में, वो भी तो हर रोज change होती है. And you have lived through this in the last 4 or 5 months. We got to know more about the impacts. We not got to know more about the health. We got to know more about vaccine aa rahi hai ki nahi aa rahi. Kuch mulkon mein why it is going much higher. In other countries like Pakistan, the surprise ki yaar, it somehow got managed. Not just managed from a management perspective, but somehow did not blow up into as big a thing as everyone else was expecting or some were experiencing. So there's a lot of knowledge change that's happened. And some of these you will note if you look when we interviewed them, their views might have been slightly different. However, my point here is the following, and I want to get into the gist of what I want to say. I want to share with you 8 big lessons that we found. There were many, but 8 big lessons that relate to the theme of this conference. And relate to where we might be in a post-COVID world, or whatever it might be called, as a globe, right? And I will leave it to the question and answer or to yourself to see how that links to Pakistan. Lekin the argument is कि जो दुनिया में हो रहा है हम उससे महफूज तो नहीं रह सकते. It is going to have an impact on us. We are going to be in the middle of that. So 8 lessons, if you will. The first lesson is the most interesting one for me, because most interesting lessons in any work, any research, is always where you are wrong. And I am a good researcher because I am always wrong. मैं जो भी hypothesis लेके आता हूँ, I find something new, and that is a blessing. But let me start with the first one, where what we thought was in fact not so. So right in March we said that the series is going to be called World After Corona. And our biggest lesson is that there is no world after Corona. और ये सोचने वाली बात है. There is no world after Corona, meaning ये नहीं कि world नहीं है after Corona, लेकिन after जो है gives a sense as if there was a world before Corona, then this coronavirus happens and we all stop, and then another new world starts right after this, which is in some ways similar, some ways different to the world that was there before it. And what we are finding already, and you are finding with this seminar, right? The fact that we are doing this on Zoom, the fact that a lot of other things are happening in your life, the fact that, for example, how people buy things on the internet, food to groceries has changed, and so on and so forth, means that the change is not coming, it is already here. Not a political statement, लेकिन वो तब्दीली जो है वो आ नहीं रही है, वो आ गई. Political statement नहीं है, लेकिन कहने का मकसद ये है कि what Corona does is that because the crisis is so big from a health, from a society, and from an economic perspective, the changes it is triggering are already triggered. We cannot therefore afford to wait this out. बहुत सी जो कुदरती आफात होती है, ज़लज़ला होता है, सैलाब होता है, दूसरी चीजें होती हैं, उसमें the reaction is कि you stop, you leave everything you are doing, you fight the crisis, you come out on the other side, and then you rebuild. Right? क्योंकि घर टूट चुके होते हैं, दीवार गिर चुकी होती है, खेत खराब हो चुके होते हैं, आप रुक जाते हैं. आप पहले कहते हैं यार अपनी जान बचाओ, अपनी खानदान की जान बचाओ, अपनी मवेशियों की जान बचाओ, save yourself, get to the other side. Once you're on the other side, then rebuild. Corona is not that sort of a crisis, because the rebuilding is already happening. So I would, for example, assume, and I won't go into this, higher education has changed. Universities are never going to be the same that they were. Now that doesn't mean कि वो बिल्कुल एक दिन में change हो जाएंगी, लेकिन now the change is permanent. The only difference will be which universities will change faster, come to the same change faster, which will be dragged by their feet, which will try to sort of defy the current and therefore get bruised and come out on the other side. And by that, I don't just mean this technology, Zoom teaching. I mean how classes will look, I mean where students will go, I mean what students will study, I mean how students will study, I mean how teaching will be done. And we are seeing this very much here in the US, which is probably the worst hit, not just by Corona, but by its changes. You are seeing it in Europe. You will see it in the mobility of students, but that is only one example. We are seeing it in the IT area. We are seeing it in the e-commerce area. We are seeing this in the retail area. हम अमूमन e-commerce सोचते हैं कि यार e-commerce को क्या हुआ, in many all over the world, but even in Pakistan, you can now order much more easily food on your phone, and even companies and brands that you would not imagine are beginning to be able to deliver like that, and so on and so forth. And you say, "Acha yaar, ye farak to nahi pada na. Okay, pehle I would go there and pick it up. Now someone comes in and gives it." But you look at the scale of it and you say, "Nahi, this is a significant shift, not just in e-commerce. That's what we are focused on. It's a shift in retail. It's a shift, therefore, in employment. It is a shift, therefore, in the type of jobs that will be there. And there will be also many new jobs." But the point I'm making, and I don't want to put everything into this, is that this notion of after was not a very useful notion. And what we are finding is that the smart money as well as the necessary money is basically on adapting to the changes now. I am here at Boston University. One of the things that is happening, not just because we planned it, but because it has become inevitable, is that the shape of the classroom has changed. So this evening, today is Wednesday, I teach on Wednesdays. This evening, I will be teaching my class on policy analysis. And the classroom looks different because social distancing ki tarah wajah se, all the seats are arranged in a very different way. Half my students are on Zoom, half of them are in the class. Right? In my case, I will be in the class talking to them. In other cases, some of the professors will be on Zoom. So there are many, there is a microphone at the top of the room that didn't used to be there. There is a camera on the ceiling, which moves when I talk. And the point I'm making is that the change is here and it will continue to be here over the next many years. So we are not waiting for a post-corona world. We are living through a post-corona world and we are changing now. हमारी जो आदतें आज change हो रही हैं, the way we interact, ये आदतें वापस नहीं जाएंगी. ऐसा नहीं होगा कि we will say कि कोरोना आया था, so we went into this mode, अब खत्म हो गया, now let's go back. We will go back to the place wherever we go back with new habits. And that we think is right now the biggest sort of lesson of the world after corona, that the after is not really after, it is now. And what does that mean for policy? What does that mean for Pakistan? What does that mean for Quetta or Lahore or Karachi? What it means is that the smart thing to do or the not smart thing to do is to wait it out. There are many people who I think are still saying, "Acha ji, ab ye ho jayega, tab dekhenge." Tab tak it will be too late. Again, I talk about universities because I'm at a university, you are at a university. Universities that are going to wait it out and see how to do things later might be too late. Reputations will be changed, rankings will be changed. People in people's mind, stories of which is good and which is not will be changed. So that was the biggest finding. There is not after corona, but after corona is right now. The second big lesson, and these are the big ones, and then I'll come to more specific ones, is about the type of change. Right? So the first one was on the speed, the type of change. And what we found was that if you corona bhi dekhen, and maybe this is the thing that explains Pakistan's numbers, corona impacted mostly those who had other conditions. When we say there were so many deaths about corona, they are right. They are corona deaths, but they are usually not just corona deaths. What happens is that very often what we find is that someone has an existing condition, because of age, because of some other health condition. And in the normal run of things, it is a condition that can be managed. In comes coronavirus, it puts a shock on the system, and you cannot survive because that existing condition is now added with this new shock. Right? So it accelerates the existing conditions. Exactly the same is true. And this, I think, is most relevant to Pakistan, as to other developing countries. What exactly the same is true on the policy and impact side, the economic impact side, or the social impact side. All across the world, here in the US, अगले हफ्ते हमने supposedly election करानी. What is happening in Pakistan right now? What is happening in India right now? What is happening in Europe right now? What is happening anywhere in the world right now in any field? What you realize is that whatever was the existing condition before Corona gets accelerated, gets exacerbated, gets more complex because of this new shock. So just like कि अगर मुझे पहले ही blood pressure है या heart disease है, जब corona आया तो I become more vulnerable to it. Then in any system, whether it's an institution, whether आपकी पान की दुकान है या आपकी कोई factory है या आप मुल्क है, जो भी आपकी pathologies पहले थी, जो भी आपके मसाइल पहले थे, they get compounded because of corona. And that is a very, very interesting thing as you look around the world. So you look around the world and usually we would say कि अच्छा यार जो rich countries हैं, they will work out better. Right? उनके पास resources हैं, उनके पास science है, उनके पास पैसे हैं, US में इतने Nobel मिलते हैं, तो obviously they will do better. And जो गरीब ममालिक हैं, they will do worse. और we think कि नहीं यार democracy बड़ी जबरदस्त चीज होती है, तो जो democratic हैं वो सारे अच्छे हो जाएंगे, और जो नहीं democratic हैं वो अच्छे नहीं होंगे. Or something else. And what we found was that none of those things mattered. Right? So you look around the world, चाहे वो किसी कोशिश करके हुआ, चाहे वो अल्लाह की रहमत से हो गया, जिसलिए भी हुआ, there is no pattern either within countries or within sectors or among sectors of where the shock was greater or less, except in existing conditions. So agar aap dekhein, let's stick to countries, if you see which countries did well, it is not usually that they were rich, all the rich did well, or the divide is not between rich or poor, or democratic or undemocratic, or large or small, or west or east, or democratic or not. The divide, if you see something somewhere, it is either about leadership, or I would say it is mostly about existing conditions. Now, there is a theory that maybe jahan existing conditions itni harsh thi already, itni buri thi, कि corona wasn't that big a shock, so फिर आपको उतना shock नजर नहीं आया. We will find that out. But what we are finding out is कि this thing which management people always talk about, कि in a crisis, the most important thing is your resilience. And this is what resilience is, right? If you have less problems to begin with, in any area, then you are more resilient because you can apply those to those. So that was two. Let me go to number three. And number three is about the global political order. And I know this is about economics, but economics and politics cannot be decoupled. So let me say something about it. The third big lesson was that there is a shakeup, and I'm going to talk about lots of shakeups. There is a shakeup in the global political order. ये वही बात है जो पहले हो रहा था. ये already होना था. But things that would have taken 5 years, 10 years have now taken 5 months, 10 months because they've been accelerated. And the biggest part of that shakeup is the rise of China. Now, rise of China is not new. Rise of China was already happening. Rise of China was already creating a tension with the US. But what has happened is largely because of corona, partly because of people like Mr. Trump in the US, Mr. Xi in China, the type of leaders that they are, what we've seen is an acceleration of that. And now it is clear that we are living in the midst of a major great power tussle. We like it or not, lekin honte hai. Ab to hai. We are going to be living through a major global power tussle between China and the US. And corona is the thing that accelerated it, but it is not the thing that caused it, and it is not the thing that will stop it. We are going to continue seeing that in the future. But what corona did was that dono ke jo hai na dastane, the gloves are off. In some ways, a battle that was simmering, jo halki si low boil pe thi, halki aanch pe thi. ट्रेड वॉर की थोड़ी सी बात होती थी, बहुत हुई तो ये, लेकिन प्रोटेक्शनिज्म की बात होती थी, नेशनलिज्म की बात होती थी, वो लोग बेल्ट एंड रोड जिसको हम सीपैक कहते हैं उसकी बात करते थे. नाउ दैट इज ऑफ. And particularly from the US, we saw a very aggressive, and particularly from the current US president, a very aggressive stance on that. But we saw the same also from China. And therefore, what that means for countries like Pakistan is that we cannot sort of avoid it. ये वो गेम नहीं है जो आप साइड पे देख के जो है ना स्पेक्टेटर हो जाएंगे कि अच्छा यार जब खत्म हो जाए तो मुझे उठा देना. This is a game partly because of our geography, but largely because every country is going to go through this. The next many years, this is going to be structured like that. When we spoke to our experts, one of the interesting thing was that 100 episodes I did, 100 interviews. Unme se there is only one that was on China, and there was only one more that was on Asia in general. But more than about 60 of them really talked about China because no matter what I asked them, the answer was China. मैं कहता था टेक्नोलॉजी उधर से जवाब आता था चाइना. मैं कहता था जी इकोनॉमिक लोन्स डेट वो कहते थे चाइना. मैं कहता था जी डेवलपमेंट वो कहते थे चाइना. Right? And the difference about this is that the US was also equally everywhere, right? But that we are used to. That's what being a big power means. That you have a saya, आपका जो influence है, आपका जो shadow है, वो हर चीज पे होता है. And now you are seeing that shot of shadow coming in China. इसमें ये मसला नहीं होगा कौन किसका दोस्त है, कौन किसका नहीं है, because बड़ी दोस्तियां जो हैं वो change होंगी. Already हो रही हैं, कुछ दूसरी होंगी. You are seeing this in what is happening in the Middle East. You are seeing this what is happening in the Gulf in particular. You are seeing this in what is happening in Europe. You are certainly seeing this in what is happening in Pakistan and South Asia with CPEC. But the point is that we are now in a volatile period which looks something like, वापस अगर आपने जाना है तो about 100 years ago 1914. Not 1940, but 1914, 1914. And the type of turmoil, now that doesn't mean that this has to necessarily lead to a world war like it did then, but this does mean that the conflict is on, the gloves are off. And if you are anywhere in the world, your politics and therefore your economics is going to be defined by this. And if you allow me to show you one more 2-minute clip on what this means, which is a similar clip, but this one is on politics.
Like politically is greater.
So if you just allow me again 2 minutes to see what some of our experts are saying and why I'm saying that this is such a big deal.
I've never seen a period in which the degree of uncertainty as to what the world will look like politically is greater than it is today.
What COVID-19 has done is to confirm the long-term trend of the return of Asia.
Human society and history tends to pick up on 3 or 4 different topics that affect us all. One is disease, it's part of our global history. One is on climate, one is natural resources, and one is on demographics. So right now, China sits in the middle of all of those kinds of questions.
COVID-19 really revealed, I think, a number of uncomfortable truths about the United States and China and their relationship.
Underlying fundamental structural lucidity and rivalry in which a rapidly rising China is seriously threatening to displace the US.
Security. The EU is in a very bad neighborhood, and that also links to the migrant and refugee crisis.
One of the effects that we see is fear of migrants ramping up.
I have been surprised how suddenly we are now concerned more about how many masks a country has as opposed to how much oil or energy.
There should be a conversation about what should be the definition of national security in the 21st century.
I think for the United States, alliances become more important. NATO becomes more important.
It's very clear that because of COVID, the United States is going to leave the Middle East. We have to expect that some governments in the Middle East will fall.
Already, we've seen a number of African countries that have suspended elections. And I can promise you, I can guarantee you that there will be many more countries in 2020 that do suspend their elections.
This US election is the most important exercise of the democratic franchise anywhere in the world, I would say, for the last 90 years at least.
It's embarrassing how terribly America has addressed this problem.
I think it's very important for the next president of the United States to really try to heal what has happened to our country.
The world after COVID is going to look an awful lot like the world before COVID.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I hope the sound and video came, but you again heard these very serious, very thoughtful people talking about the future of the world in this dramatic sense. What does that mean for our topic? It means that economics is going to happen in a volatile world. Right? That's the point of the global political order shaking up. So China is one part of it. The major part of it is the China-Russia, but this will lead to a lot of other changes, including in where markets will be, including in where opportunities will be. And again, in a country like Pakistan, a lot of it will be in the language of what we call it CPEC or our relations with the US, but also then therefore our relations with IMF, with the Asian Infrastructure Bank. So all of these things are going to happen with the shadow of politics. The fourth lesson is directly related to that, which is the death of multilateralism. Maybe death is too strong a term, but it is clear the biggest surprise, in fact, was not that China was rising. The biggest surprise was कि यार यहाँ आपके पास हमारी सबकी जिंदगी की the worst ever global crisis. No, well, worst हो या ना हो, लेकिन global है, right? It is affecting everyone. This is a truly global crisis. And what is missing? Who is not on the scene at all? International institutions. Right? So this infrastructure for 70 years of global institutions, whether it's the UN, whether it's the World Bank, whether it's the IMF, right, of international institutions, वो गायब है. बेचारा WHO शुरू में आया था, उसको भी ट्रम्प ने भगा दिया लगा के, जुगते मार के. So the absence of multilateralism is a very, very surprising and odd to me, but dangerous trend to the extent that it happened. And what does that mean again for the future? What it means for the future is that if multilateralism went missing in this crisis, then what do you expect to happen right after it? And countries like ourselves that depend on the multilateral system are going to find that in this ye jo hathi learning, in the fight of the elephants, one of the ways we will get trampled on is that we won't have the shield of the international institutions. We also like sort of, jukte marna and criticizing the international institutions, but the fact is that they have been saviors of developing poorer countries far more. And that shield is also gone because once the great powers are all consumed in themselves as they were in Corona, then what happens is that they are not having the time or the ability or now the resources for helping or working with others. One of the clips that you saw in the first one was my colleague and friend, Dr. Atif Mia from Princeton talking about debt. And this goes directly to IMF. So when we have had fiscal crises in the world before, what happened? Hota ye tha ki something like IMF would come in to help. Right? Like, and what happens when IMF comes? What IMF would come is because there were other big countries that are backing the IMF that would have the resources to say, we will bail you out. But in a debt environment where we are already globally at 0% interest rate ko aap aur kam karne se kar sakte, because we are nearly at zero, and the international institutions, every country is itself saddled with problems. So they will say ki yaar hum tumhari kya madad karenge, hum to khud is phase mein. Right? So that death of multilateralism has serious economic consequences. I'm sorry I'm taking too long, so let me start wrapping up. My fifth one is directly related to what I just said, which is the global economic shakeup. Right? I won't go into it because you spent the whole day, and I've also been mentioning it. As I said with the political shakeup is a global economic shakeup, and partly the economic global shakeup comes because different countries are differently affected. So yes, Corona affects in bad ways, but if a country has far more Corona impact, then the economic impact is also more. In some ways, jo hame ye ek breathing room somehow mila hai Pakistan mein, if we don't use it, if we squander it, the way to use it is that there are countries whose economies are totally stalled. So if yours is not, then this is the time to leapfrog. This is the time to jump up. Right? Because those who are stalled, you heard Hosman say, those who are hit, their economies won't come back to 2019 status for another 5 years. Right? And that gives countries where the impact is less the time to catch up. And that means shake up. That means that the Vietnams can actually do much better and catch up with the Thailands, because in Vietnam, the impact seems to be much less. right? And countries that again will wait it out will not get benefit from the economic shakeup. The converse of that is my sixth lesson, which is also that there will be lots of local economic opportunities. So we should not think of Corona's economic impact simply as what we will lose, but where are there areas to gain, right? And again, one of the areas of those, ये मेरे पास हर वक्त पड़े होते हैं mask, was अगर आपको याद हो कि मार्च में एकदम जो है ना shortage हुई because no one really had so many masks everywhere. And those who could mobilize suddenly to become manufacturers had a leapfrogging. And what do you think happens to a company? A company that is able to very quickly transition to get to making masks, they will become clients for other things because the buyer will say, yeah, these people are good. These people can quickly change, right? So the local opportunities change. The local opportunities most importantly have changed in the IT area, in the e-commerce area, but they've changed in many, many ways. In Boston, where I am at the university, one of the big changes is which restaurants are thriving and which are not. Those that were able to quickly transition to a different world because they were able to use outside sitting or different type of sitting or put up plexiglass, stay in business, were not only able to keep their own employees, but now that things get better, they are able to move faster, and those that weren't die off. So there is global economic shakeup and there is local economic opportunity. The seventh one, and again, I'm going to rush through this because of time reasons. The seventh is a tech shakeup, right? We are seeing a technology shakeup. We very often think of that again as IT. I think IT is the interesting, but not the most interesting part of it. The biggest part of it, of course, I think will be health. In Pakistan, as one of few of these interviews with my Pakistani colleagues, the face of medicine has changed. Now, again, we still have problems of not too many people not being in the system, but those who are in the system, the idea of what you call telemedicine that was people were saying will happen in 20 years has happened in 4 months. And that will not come back. And that has great opportunities, but it also has great risks. I had one interview with a scientist, and he said the future belongs to 2 technologies: AI and bioengineering, artificial intelligence and bioengineering. And again, as an educational institution, there will be a tech shakeup, not just because new technologies are coming in this period, but jo hamara jhaka hai, our willingness to do something new. You know, things we thought we could never do, we did in 1 week. अगर मैं आपसे कहता कि यार सब कुछ छोड़ो घर पे काम करते हैं, you would have said यार ये हो ही नहीं सकता. If I had said that in January, you would have said this is never going to work. This is not going to work in Pakistan. When you had to do it, it happened in 1 week. Again, those habits are not going to go, but one of those habits is going to be how we respond to technology. And therefore is the space for entrepreneurship. And finally and lastly, that relates to the shake-up, and I don't know where it will go, but the shake-up in work. And we talk about jobs, but first we also need to talk about work. The shake-up in work is also not going to go back. And I'm not just talking कि आप remote काम करते हैं या घर पे काम करते हैं, Zoom पे करते हैं या नहीं करते. But globally, we are going to find a redefinition of what work means, what the work day means. Even I'll tell you a simple thing. सारी ये जो यूनिवर्सिटियाँ होती हैं, ये हम लोग usually सितंबर में start करते हैं, मई में खत्म करते हैं, गर्मियों में छुट्टी पे चले जाते हैं. And I've always thought कि ये क्यों है? Why is it? Why for 3 months are we away? And why does the semester start in September? January में क्यों नहीं शुरू हो जाता? Right? And the reason for that is not just कि वो है, वो इसलिए है कि at one point universities, when they started in a big way, at least in the UK, were mostly only feudals and their children who were coming to Cambridge and Oxford, and they needed to go back to their zameen, to their muzaras, when the agriculture season was there. And therefore the academic calendar was structured around their agricultural season, and that's why they would start in September. Right? And that habit has stuck. Similarly, new habits made now, just about the workday, are invariably going to change, and different societies, Pakistan, US, are going to find different ways of how to deal with that. So again, these 8 things, what we are finding is that there is a lot of challenge, but there is a lot of opportunities. I will end there with the final thought. Why am I saying this all to you? Partly because I had a great time learning all of these things from these very smart, bright people, but mostly because the big lesson, the lesson that encompasses all 8 for these, is that the time to think and the time to act is today, is now. It is not to say कि अच्छा अब मैं सोचता हूं कि हम क्या करेंगे और 4 साल बाद हम वो कर लेंगे, because 4 साल बाद दुनिया is going to be different, and the future will belong to those who start adapting now. The first mover advantage, the early advantages. In some ways, all of us individually and all of us as institutions need to think like entrepreneurs. जिस तरह वो एंटरप्रेन्योर होता है ना, वो सोचता है कि यार अपॉर्चुनिटी किधर है, और इससे पहले कि कोई और उस अपॉर्चुनिटी को पकड़े मैं पकड़ लूं, राइट? ये डिजाइनर पिज्जा जो होता है, नॉन पिज्जा की पहला जो शॉप है वो मैं करूं इससे पहले कि कोई और आके जो है मार्केट को कैप्चर कर ले. This is that sort of an entrepreneurial moment for the world because of the political turmoil, because of the economic shakeup, and because of the technology shakeup. Those forces are giving both a challenge, but they are giving an opportunity, especially for countries like Pakistan, where we have somehow been blessed to not see that big an impact. And the way to do that is to say खुदा का शुक्र करना चाहिए, नफल पढ़ने चाहिए, grateful होना चाहिए, yes, but then also use that time that has been awarded to us somehow to try to leapfrog. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went on, and I hope this made some sense. I'll be very happy to take questions and thoughts.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Dr. Adil Najam, for such a captivating discourse. Your keynote has indeed helped us understanding the world after COVID-19. I would like to open the floor for our audience to ask questions. Please feel free to type your questions in the QA answer mode. Okay, sir, we have a number of questions. So I start with Mr. Ehsan Achiksi, who wants to ask that what you say on China versus USA tussle. Can one conclude that global powers need to be more tolerant of each other's behavior for the global good?
जी, thank you very much. बहुत, and अगर आप इजाजत दें तो I will also join the second question जो UN के बारे में, and we can get to more from Aziz Ahmed Saab about के UN की position to direct its members for designing.
Question that does the UN in position to direct its member for designing a policy that could reduce uncertainties that are caused by pandemics and miseries like COVID-19?
So Ehsan and Aziz Saab, both of you, China-US tussle जाने वाली नहीं है. I hope that it will not become a violent tussle, but it is going to be a defining moniker for the next many years. And it doesn't matter who wins the US election in next week. Whether it is Biden, whether it is Trump, it's going to be the same. China clearly has a very strong leader at its helm. This is a historic tussle. What that means is that it is not really dependent on one leader or two leaders. There are some processes that are historic, which means that उसमें जो भी actor आ जाए वो उधर ही जाना. You essentially have this thing जो history में बहुत बार होता है, और जब भी होता है तो in a way, जिस तरह physics होती है उसी तरह history होती है in some ways. There is a power that dominates, it becomes a major dominating power, and then some other power rises to and starts coming to a position where it starts, if not threatening it, nearly equaling it, right? So in a way, there is a mechanical dynamic to it. Now, when that happens, the big power has no way except to try to do something about it. ऐसा नहीं होता कि वो बैठी रहती है कि यार तुम आए हो तो चलो आ जाओ, तुम चले जाना, मैं फिर पीछे रह जाऊंगा. That's not how history works. One way or the other, the big power has to retaliate in some ways, try to either enhance its own power or to reduce the power of the other, right? ये मैं एक conceptual बात कर रहा हूँ, ये physics की तरह. Now, usually that has happened in history through war, because that was the major driver of international relations, if you will. The question is, are we a wise enough species that we will do it some other ways? At this point, at least, it is happening not through armed conflict. It is happening mostly through trade conflict. It is mostly happening through economic influence. Just like in the Cold War, you saw these spheres of influence. कि ये मुल्क सोवियत का है, वो मुल्क जो है वो US का, and we put sort of all sorts of things कि ये surkh hai और वो sabz hai और ये fulana hai और ये dhamaaka hai. But at the back of that was a superpower tussle, right? And we just identified ourselves with ideology, but that's ideology मेरे ख्याल में हमेशा secondary होती है, पहली चीज power होती है, unfortunately. This time we are seeing it in economic terms. We are seeing not political spheres of influence, we are seeing economic spheres of influence. And Aziz Saab's question relates to this. This is why I wanted to link those. As far as the UN is concerned, to assume that the UN has the power to check any of these, I think is a folly. ये हमारी गलती है. हम जब कहते हैं ना UN ये क्यों नहीं करता, तो मुझे हंसी आती है. That just means we don't understand what the UN is, and we don't understand the limits of an international organization whose only power comes from its members and where the structure is again of the great powers. So I don't think that the UN will have the ability to check the great powers. I think what the UN gives is a forum to other countries, including smaller countries, to restrain them in their action, but not in their impulse. So I actually think, and I didn't show you, the last episode that we did in the series was my interview with Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General. And we talked about the future of the UN in that. And I agree with him. I think the potential of the UN and the need for the UN is never greater than it is today. Never greater. अगर कोई वक्त था जब UN की जरूरत थी, तो वो today. Now, whether we as countries and people will allow that to happen will depend on us.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Moving forward, we have another question from Asana Jagsisa. He is asking that reference to the above question, do you see that happening? If not, how do you see the future of countries like Pakistan? I think he's relating to his first question, where he asked about the global powers need to be more tolerant of each other behaviors for the global good. So in that aspect, do you see that happening? If not, so how do you see the future of countries like Pakistan?
The future of countries like Pakistan will be decided by countries like Pakistan. When I talk about these global trends and they seem big, that is not to say कि यार ये trend है, now live with it. That's not how history happens. Other parts of the world will make their moves, but small parts of the world, Pakistan itself, will make its own moves, and those will define the future of Pakistan. Not just how we respond to them will define the future of Pakistan. I have been on the argument, and I want to come to the economics soon, but I've been to the argument that this is not a time to take sides. Pakistan should always be only on one side, and that is the side of the people of Pakistan. ये जब मैं बड़ी बड़ी बातें करता हूँ अबाउट ग्लोबल पॉलिटिक्स का, ये मतलब नहीं है कि हमारे अपने मसाइल जो हैं वो अनइम्पॉर्टेंट है और हमें सिर्फ ये हाई पॉलिटिक्स की बात करनी चाहिए. उसका मतलब ऑपोजिट है. उसका मतलब ये है कि हाउ वी डील विद हाई पॉलिटिक्स शुड ओनली डिपेंड ऑन दैट व्हिच इज गुड फॉर यू एंड गुड फॉर मी एंड गुड फॉर द एवरेज पाकिस्तानी. राइट? सो आई थिंक पाकिस्तान्स फर्स्ट प्रायोरिटी शुड नॉट बी कि अमेरिका है कि चीन है. Pakistan's first priority should be what is good for development in Pakistan, what is good for jobs in Pakistan, what is good for livelihood of the Pakistani person, what is good for education in Pakistan, right? And if you keep that center rather than कि हम इसकी side पे और उसकी side पे, then the focus moves from which side we are on. Because once we take sides, then we make up stories. राइट? ये हमने पहले भी कोल्ड वॉर में देखा है. फिर यही हो रहा है कि जी ये हमारा दोस्त है, वो हमारा दोस्त नहीं है, ये अच्छा है, वो बुरा है. कोई दोस्त नहीं होता, कोई अच्छा बुरा नहीं होता. आप अगर अपने दोस्त नहीं है तो कोई और किसी का दोस्त नहीं है, is my basic rule of international affairs. And therefore our policy should be derived from what is best for Pakistan development. And in these moments of turmoils, what that means is if you focus on that, then you look at every decision and every move on the chessboard on the basis of what is good for the citizens of the country. And therefore, I hope we do not become entangled in the great power politics of the future or the great economic tussles of the future. And don't get trapped into कि ये वाला system बड़ा अच्छा है, वो वाला system बड़ा बुरा है, क्योंकि कोई system अच्छा नहीं है. गरीब आदमी के लिए कोई system अच्छा नहीं होता. The only thing that is important is, again, the best development indicators for Pakistan. I know it's difficult advice to follow, but that I would say is where I am.
Thank you so much. So moving forward, we have another question from Dr. Zahir Abbas. who says that how can poor economy like Pakistan will make a transition in new COVID-19 friendly environment because government as well as private universities have shortages of funds.
ज़हीर साहब आप बुरा ना मानिएगा, शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड मेरे ख्याल से सिर्फ बहाना होता है। जब काम ना करना हो ना तो फिर शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड आ जाती है। शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड तो है गरीब तो क्या करे। ये कहना कि जी मैं गरीब हूं, मैं इंडिविजुअल की बात कर रहा हूं, मेरे पास शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड है इसलिए मैं कोशिश नहीं करूंगा, इज नेवर अ थिंग। सो आई थिंक लेट अस टेक शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड एज अ गिवन। इसको अज्यूम कर लेते हैं ना, जिस तरह आप मैथ की इक्वेशन जब सॉल्व करते हैं आप अज्यूम कर लें जी शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड, वो तो है ही है। अब सवाल ये है कि विद इन द शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड्स व्हाट कैन वी डू बेस्ट, because if the argument is कि जी we will not do anything, and I know ज़हीर साहब ये नहीं कह रहे, बिल्कुल नहीं कह रहे, मैं I'm making a conceptual point, इसलिए मैंने अपना बैकग्राउंड चेंज कर दिया ताकि इसको इक्वेशन की तरह देखें। बट इफ द शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड आर्गुमेंट इज कि यार वी नो वी लिव इन अ प्लेस वेयर देयर इज गोइंग टू बी शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड्स, देन द क्वेश्चन इज ऑफ प्रायोरिटी। देन द क्वेश्चन इज, देखिए अगर मैं गरीब आदमी हूं और मेरे पास पैसे नहीं है, शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड्स हैं, तो मैं क्या करता हूँ? मैं फिर ये करता हूँ कि अच्छा यार जो सारी चीजें मैं कर सकता हूँ उसमें सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट कौन सी है? हाँ मैं गाड़ी ले सकता हूँ, हाँ मैं जाके मूवी देख सकता हूँ, हाँ मैं एक बड़ी सी टीवी ले सकता हूँ, लेकिन ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट क्या है? ये कि मैं बच्चे को शायद पढ़ा लूँ। ठीक है, बहुत अच्छे स्कूल नहीं जाएगा लेकिन किसी स्कूल तो जाएगा, राइट? दैट इज व्हाट यू डू विद शॉर्टेज ऑफ फंड्स। आई थिंक अनफॉर्चुनेटली हमारा वो पार्टली ये है कि वी थिंक ओके, एंड अगेन आई एम नॉट क्वेश्चनिंग द क्वेश्चन बिकॉज आई अंडरस्टैंड ज़हीर साहब कुछ और कह रहे हैं, बट एज अ पॉलिसी प्रॉब्लम shortage of funds is a given condition rather than a recommendation. Recommendation तो वो तब होना कि आपको पता हो कि कहीं बहुत सारे फंड्स पड़े हैं और वो आपको मिल जाएंगे। अगर आप अज्यूम कर लें कि नहीं है तो फिर मसला जो है वो प्रायोरिटी का होता है। And I do not think कि shortage of funds is the challenge for Pakistan. I really don't think so. बहुत सारे challenges बेहतर हो जाते हैं फंड से। I think the challenge is having a vision and a strategy at an institutional level. Right? How can we benefit from these opportunities? The fact is कि जिन्होंने benefit करना है वो कर रहे हैं। I mean, I have been amazed, and I don't know, मैं कोयटा अभी recently unfortunately नहीं आया, I don't know वहाँ क्या है, लेकिन I know in other parts and I'm sure in कोयटा जिसका दिमाग चल रहा था कोविड के जमाने में, they found opportunities, जुगाड़ लगा के, तरीका निकाल के कि इससे जो है how can we benefit, how can we increase our brand, how can we increase our share, how can I get someone to deliver food on a motorcycle, right? That is how you deal with opportunities. You don't wait for opportunities कि मुझे कोई extra पैसे देगा तो फिर मैं कुछ करूंगा, ऐसे नहीं होना। You say कि अच्छा मैं क्या कर रहा था और उसको मैं कैसे restructure कर सकता हूँ। So again, I appreciate Dr. Saab's question, and I hope I have not, I've purposely taken it to a different direction. Because the direction I want to take is the usual answer to this is कि हाँ जी इस चीज को पैसे ज्यादा मिलने चाहिए, या जरूर मिलने चाहिए, लेकिन वो तो पहले भी मिलने चाहिए थे ना, पिछले 70 साल से मिलने चाहिए थे। जब नहीं मिले तो let us assume कि नहीं मिलेंगे, and then let us say कि जो हमारे पास resources हैं उसमें सबसे important चीज क्या है, और इस वक्त जो है leapfrog करने के लिए कौन सी चीजें ऐसी हैं जो मुझे शायद नहीं करनी चाहिए और कौन सी चीजें हैं जिस पे मैं अपना पूरा जोर डाल दूं। आई थिंक जोर डालने वाली चीजें सारी वो हैं वेयर देयर इज एन अनमेट अपॉर्चुनिटी। आई थिंक अगर कोई प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, दो हैं, वन इज अनमेट अपॉर्चुनिटी एंड द अदर इज लीपफ्रॉगिंग। वेयर इज इट दैट देयर इज एन एक्स्ट्रा स्पेस फॉर मी टू लीपफ्रॉग, जंप मार के, मैं जिस तरह सेलफोन के साथ किया था ना हमने, ये जब सेल फोन थे, one of the reasons why we jumped was that a condition was created where people could move directly from having no phone to having a cell phone. हमने ये इंतजार नहीं किया था या कर सके नहीं थे, अच्छी बात हुई कि हम पहले जाएंगे लैंडलाइन पे फिर जाएंगे सेल फोन। Those are the type of opportunities to be looking for, I think, in the economic realm. And to focus very, very specifically also on the work part, the jobs part, the livelihood part, right? Because in many ways our big resource still is human resources. So at a time when many in the world may not be able to do that, मैं एक बड़ी छोटी सी example देता हूँ, I'm sorry I'm going long, मैंने ये last पूरी talk में नहीं इस्तेमाल किया, I should have, supply chains. Right? So one thing that is clear is that the world supply chains are dramatically changing. right? There were countries that totally got out of the supply chain because unka COVID impact itna zyada tha ki they couldn't fulfill their supply chain obligations. Now the question is that we are already seeing a change in shift in supply chains. Are we in the new shift or not? That is the type of opportunity we should be thinking of.
Okay, sir, moving forward, we have a question from Dr. Umar Khalid. What sort of future do you see from the Bretton Woods institutions, World Bank and IMF in supporting developing countries? Are they going to stay relevant for the global economic order in view of China's growing influence and aid to the developing economies in the form of infrastructure development under the Belt and Road Initiative?
Thank you, Dr. Dr. Umar has a very good question. There are two parts of it. One is what happens to Bretton Woods institutions. For those who may not know, by Bretton Woods, we mean essentially the international financial architecture, the World Bank, the IMF, the IFC, but also in some ways now some UN organizations, although they are not exactly Bretton Woods, like in wo wale institute, multilateral jisko main keh raha tha. And the second part of the question is कि क्या इसका ताल्लुक जो है वो चीन से और CPEC से और Belt and Road Initiative से. So those are two related, but I will separate and then link them back. I hope that multilateralism survives. I have spent my whole life being a critic and finding sort of ways to suggest improvements in Bretton Woods, especially IMF and the World Bank, but also the UN. But that doesn't mean that I think they are bad ideas. They were good ideas when they began. They are still good ideas. And so that doesn't mean that उनके problem नहीं है. That doesn't mean that they're all good. ऐसा नहीं होता है कोई चीज या बिल्कुल ठीक होती है, अच्छी होती है, बिल्कुल बुरी होती है. But I think it will not be good for developing countries if they collapse. Right? We all want them to be better, लेकिन we understand कि if अगर वो बिल्कुल ही ना होते तो things would have been worse. So ये जो हम नाराबाजी करते हैं कि जी IMF इतना हर चीज में बुरा है बुरा, बिल्कुल गलत करता है. I think lots of bad things have happened. But it is not that the idea of international institutions is bad. The idea of international institutions, the idea of multilateralism, I think has always been a good one for developing countries because individually, otherwise we will have no voice whatsoever. And one example of that, if I can say so, is FATF. लेकिन आज से 2 साल 3 साल पहले आप में से कितने थे जिन्होंने लफ्ज भी सुना था FATF? वो अपना काम कर रहे थे, किसी को पता भी नहीं था कि वो एग्जिस्ट होते हैं. And I would much rather have large-scale multilateral institutions with everyone in them like the UN, 200 members. Then more and more of these economic institutions that are chaudhahats of a few major powers, like FATF. Right? So my first point is that I do not think it is good for anyone, certainly for developing countries, if the Bretton Woods systems falls. I don't think it will. I don't think it will. Though, as I have said, it has been significantly weakened. Significantly weakened. It was already weak before COVID. And in some ways, अगर COVID का कोई सबसे बड़ा institutional मरीज है, तो वो multilateralism है. But having said that, it is not that it has gone away. So new multilateral institutions have also come. And this is the second part of Umar Saab's question. It is not that China has become, so two things have happened. First of all, China has become the major player in the same institutions. Right? So we always say that ये तो सारे American हैं, लेकिन now they are more and more Chinese. अगर आप ये institutions देख लें, उनके heads देख लें, उसमें China का influence देख लें, just as China's global political influence has risen, it has also risen in institutions of international affairs, including things like IMF. But more importantly, China is also putting together its own set of international institutions. Right? So हम World Bank की बात करते थे. Now there is a Chinese version of the World Bank. It's called AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Right? The Belt and Road Initiative is exactly like the Marshall Plan or like an economic plan. So again, ऐसा नहीं है कि बिल्कुल खत्म हो जाता. The opportunities shift. I do not foresee an end to multilateralism or international institutions. What should Pakistan do? We should just do the same thing. We should be smart about these institutions. We should not be driven ke dost kaun hai aur dushman kaun hai. We should be simply driven by what is good for the Pakistani people. Right? अगर आपके लिए पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट अच्छी है तो बनाओ. अगर आपके लिए इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर जरूरी है तो बनाओ. Not because someone is saying, but because it is good for you. and then make it in a way that is good for you, right? That does get the benefits down to the people, that does get it to the local community. So that I think has to be, but that was true before COVID. However, on his question, I would say to Umar Saab, I do not see an end to Bretton Woods. I do see a weakening of it, and I see कि जो हम बात करेंगे IMF की वो मेरे ख्याल में अभी नहीं करेंगे. I have a feeling कहीं इंशाल्लाह आप समझ ले अगले March, April में the world will start waking up to the IMF again, because if, let us hope, globally COVID starts getting better, that is when people will start saying कि अच्छा यार इसकी जो cost थी वो कितनी थी. When they start saying इसकी cost कितनी थी, they will say कि अच्छा उसका debt कितना था. जब वो कहेंगे उसका debt कितना था, तब वो कहेंगे वो debt का अब हम करेंगे क्या. और जब वो कहेंगे उस debt का हम करेंगे क्या, तब institutions like IMF and multilateral and Bretton Woods will come in. And this will happen, is happening, not only just in developing countries like Pakistan, this time it is also happening in the major powers. लेकिन ना सबसे ज्यादा किसने पे किया है इस पे, वो तो अमेरिका ने किया. वो चौथे हफ्ते जो $1 trillion का बिल पास कर देते हैं. That $1 trillion is going to come from somewhere. आप जितने मर्जी बड़े हो, $1 trillion is $1 trillion. It will have to come from somewhere. So that is how it's going to impact the global financial system.
Thank you so much, sir. As we are running short of time, we are unable to take more questions. So on behalf of Butams, I'm really grateful to you, sir, for sparing time from your schedule and delivering such a valuable keynote. Thank you, Sir Adil, Najam. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Ji.